You think you already know this case. You don't, because two of the people at the center of it have barely been covered anywhere. There's a doorbell camera in Tucson, Arizona that went dark at 1:47 in the morning. Someone reached up and turned it off, on purpose, then waited. 25 minutes. That's how long they stood there before the motion sensor caught them again. Masked, armed, right at the door of an 84-year-old woman's house. By sunrise, she was gone. Blood on the porch. Nothing else. Okay, that's the case, the way it would show up in a police report. But that's not actually what this is about, and I think if I just gave you that and moved on, I'd be doing this story wrong. Her name was Nancy. She went to church. She raised 3 kids. One of them is on your TV every single morning, and for the last 5 months, that woman, Savannah Guthrie, has had to sit behind a news desk, smile, do her job, and go home to absolutely nothing. No answer. No arrest. Just strangers online sending her fake letters claiming to know where her mother's body is. I keep trying to imagine what that's actually like, and I can't. I don't think most of us can. That's kind of the point of telling you this one. I'm going to walk you through everything that's actually happened in this case in order, and I want you to pay attention to how many times investigators thought they had something and didn't. Because by the end of this, I don't think you're going to feel reassured. I think you're going to feel what I felt, which is something closer to unease. But before any of that, I want you to know who Nancy Guthrie actually was. Because it's easy, in a case like this, to let her become a headline, the mother of a Today Show anchor, and lose the actual person underneath that sentence. Nancy Guthrie lived alone in Tucson. She was 84 years old, and by every account from people who knew her, she was an active, engaged presence in her community. The kind of woman who showed up. Investigators have noted she was expected at church the morning she was reported missing. It was her absence there on an ordinary Sunday that first told the people who loved her that something was wrong. She raised 3 children, including Savannah Guthrie, who spent the last 2 decades becoming one of the most recognized faces in American television. But long before any of that mattered, Nancy was just a mother in Arizona, living what everyone who's spoken about her describes as a quiet, settled life. The kind of life most of us assume is safe simply because it's ordinary. That's part of what makes this case so unsettling to so many people. Nancy Guthrie didn't live a public life. She wasn't famous. She was someone's mom, living alone in a house she probably felt completely safe in, on a Friday night like any other. And then she wasn't there anymore. Sometime between the night of January 31st and the early morning hours of February 1st, Nancy Guthrie disappeared. Here's what investigators have pieced together about that night. Her doorbell camera, the kind so many of us have now, the kind that's supposed to make us feel safer, was disconnected at 1:47 in the morning. Motion was detected on that same camera around 2:12 a.m., and later the FBI released footage from that window of time showing a masked, armed figure at her doorstep. She was reported missing the next day after she failed to show up at church, and when investigators searched her property, they found blood on her front porch. DNA testing later confirmed what everyone feared. It was hers. Sheriff Chris Nanos of Pima County would later say it plainly, "I believe she was abducted." I want you to picture this scene for a second, not as a headline, but as a real thing that happened to a real 84-year-old woman in her own home in the middle of the night. Someone disabled her camera. Someone came to her door. And by morning, she was gone, and there was blood where she should have been standing. Within days, investigators had something that felt like a break. A pair of black gloves found near the scene. If you've watched any true crime coverage of this case, you probably remember this detail because for a little while it was treated as significant. Evidence, a potential thread that could lead somewhere. It didn't. The gloves were eventually traced back to a local restaurant worker, completely unrelated to Nancy Guthrie, completely unrelated to whoever took her. Just a coincidence of geography and timing that ate up investigative resources chasing nothing. I want you to hold on to this moment because it's going to happen again and again. This is going to become the shape of this entire case. Not one dramatic reveal, but a slow accumulation of dead ends, each one costing time nobody could get back. As is standard in nearly every disappearance like this, investigators looked first at the people closest to Nancy. Her children, their spouses, Savannah Guthrie herself. All of them were formally cleared as suspects. I bring this up not because it's surprising. It isn't. Most families in these situations are innocent, and investigators have to rule that out methodically before they can look anywhere else. But because it means that 5 months in, with the family eliminated, investigators are still looking at what amounts to almost nothing. No named person of interest, no named suspect, just an unknown masked figure captured on a doorbell camera in the dark. On February 5th, 5 days after Nancy vanished, a note arrived at multiple media outlets. It demanded a payment be reportedly around $4 million in cryptocurrency, with a deadline attached. It reportedly contained specific details about what Nancy had been wearing, which is part of why, at the time, investigators treated it seriously. The FBI, trying to test its authenticity, deposited a small amount of cryptocurrency into an account as the note instructed. It was never touched. Nobody claimed it. Then on February 6th, a second note arrived, this one far darker. It claimed Nancy Guthrie was already dead, that she had been buried in nature. I don't think I need to explain what receiving a note like that does to a family that's already living through the worst uncertainty imaginable. Savannah Guthrie addressed it publicly on live television, in front of her Today Show colleagues, visibly trying to hold herself together. She said, quote, "I love you guys, and I love this place, and this is unusual and unprecedented. I don't have any comment on this story, and I'm not involved in our coverage, but I can't pretend I'm not here, and so since I am, I wanted to take that opportunity to ask people to come forward. Watch that clip if you can find it. There's something almost unbearable about watching someone try to do their job. A job that is, quite literally, delivering the news to the country, while living inside a story that has no ending yet. The reward for information grew over the following weeks. It started at $50,000 from the FBI. Then Savannah and her siblings added to it. By spring, the family was offering over $1 million for anything that could lead to their mother or to a conviction. As the months dragged on, another moment briefly reignited the entire case. Human bones, discovered near Nancy's home. For a family that had been living in agony for weeks by that point, I can only imagine what those hours felt like, between the discovery and the identification. Whether this was the answer nobody wanted finally arriving. It wasn't. The bones were confirmed to be unrelated to the case entirely, part of a prehistoric anthropological find, nothing to do with Nancy Guthrie at all. A geological coincidence discovered at the worst possible moment, for a family that didn't need one more false alarm. 2 false leads now, gloves that belonged to a stranger, bones that predated the case by centuries, and still, no answers about the actual woman who actually disappeared. By May, more than 4 months into the investigation, Sheriff Nanos was facing real public pressure to explain what exactly was taking so long. In an interview, he pointed to lab work, DNA testing, and digital forensics as the reason for the delay. Quote, "It's just not a detective goes out there, talks to somebody, and we can make an arrest. This is a very sensitive case. But what really makes it prolonged is we do rely on labs." He framed the caution as a strength, not a failure, saying that nobody wants to arrest the wrong person, that DNA needs to both identify a suspect and exonerate the innocent. I understand that logic. I do. But a California defense attorney named R.J. Dreiling, who's been following the case closely, pushed back on that framing directly. His quote has stuck with me. "The sheriff needs to give us concrete answers on what is going on and what he is doing, not vague platitudes about the scientific process." Dreiling went on to say something I think gets at exactly why this case has captivated so many people. Quote, "The Guthrie kidnapping has captivated the country, not just because of how well-known Ms. Guthrie's daughter is, but because if this loved and respected woman can be ripped out of her home, and we can't find the person who did it, it makes us all wonder, how safe are we all really?" That's the thing underneath all of this, isn't it? It's not really about fame. Savannah Guthrie being a recognizable face is why this story got national attention, but the fear underneath it has nothing to do with television. It's the fear of an unlocked door, a disabled camera, a stranger in a mask, and no one coming for months. But here's where this case gets genuinely strange, because while all of this was unfolding, the searches, the false leads, the fake ransom notes, the man leading the entire investigation was quietly fighting to keep his own job. In March 2026, in the middle of this investigation, the Arizona Republic published something that had nothing to do with Nancy Guthrie at all, and everything to do with whether the man searching for her could be trusted. For over 40 years, Sheriff Chris Nanos had told the public he left the El Paso Police Department in 1984 on his own terms. Records obtained by the Republic told a different story. Nanos didn't leave in 1984. He resigned in 1982 in lieu of being fired. And the records didn't stop there. Between 1977 and 1982, Nanos was flagged for infractions including gambling, insubordination, and failure to report for duty. He was suspended 8 separate times in 5 years. One of those suspensions, 15 days, was for excessive force. Internal Affairs records reportedly detail an allegation that he beat a handcuffed suspect with a flashlight. Here's the detail that turns this from old news resurfacing into something much more serious. In a sworn deposition in December 2025, just weeks before Nancy Guthrie disappeared, Nanos was asked, under oath, whether he had ever been suspended. He said no. I want you to sit with that for a second because I think it's the most important detail in this entire section. This is a man whose entire job is building cases against people who lie to investigators. And when he was put in that exact position himself, under oath, asked a direct question, he told what records say was a lie. The Pima County Sheriff's Department initially called the resume discrepancy a clerical error. 2 clerical errors, actually, the 1984 date and a promotion date that was also wrong. But the County Board of Supervisors didn't buy it. They voted unanimously to compel Nanos to answer questions under oath, with the threat of removal from office if he refused. His own deputies' union got there faster. The Pima County Deputy Sheriff's Association held a vote. Confidence in Sheriff Nanos, or no confidence, and a call for his resignation. The result was unanimous. No confidence. In the words of the union sergeant who announced it, he has lost the faith of his deputies and the community. A separate investigation, this one into how Nanos handled a political rival during his own re-election campaign, found that he'd used his authority and department resources for political gain when he suspended a commander who was running against him 3 weeks before the election, and then released her confidential personnel information in a press statement attacking her. And a recall campaign aiming to remove him from office entirely was already underway, needing nearly 122,000 signatures by July. One county supervisor put it about as bluntly as I've heard anyone say it. Nanos' handling of the Guthrie case was, in his words, a big embarrassment to the community. I want to be fair here the way I try to be with everyone in these stories. Nanos has denied intentionally misleading anyone. His attorney has argued that what happened over 4 decades ago, before he ever worked in Pima County, shouldn't matter to how he does his job now. That's a real argument, and reasonable people can disagree about how much someone's distant past should define their present. But I don't think that argument holds up cleanly here, not in this specific case. Because the entire 5 months of this investigation, every time Sheriff Nanos stood in front of a camera and asked the public and asked this family to trust the process, to be patient, to let the labs do their work, to have faith that this was being handled correctly. He was doing it while simultaneously fighting to keep the public from learning that he'd misrepresented his own record for over 40 years, and while his own deputies were formally declaring they didn't trust him either. That's not a footnote to this story. That's the story running underneath the story. A family, desperate for answers, being asked to have faith in an investigation led by a man his own department publicly said they had no faith in at all. In late June, nearly 5 months after Nancy disappeared, a third message surfaced. This one came through TMZ from someone claiming to know the identity of the kidnapper, claiming to have proof, claiming Nancy was close to death. The sender reportedly wanted payment in Bitcoin for the information. Sheriff Nanos was publicly skeptical from the start. On a local Arizona radio show, he said, quote, "I think the FBI has done a number of arrests for false or fake ransom notes. It's a shame that happens, but I think we're looking at one of those today." He was right. On July 1st, Reuters reported that the FBI had officially determined that all 3 notes were fake. Not just unverified. Fake. An FBI official told Reuters directly, "None of the ransom notes are believed to be genuine." Read that again. Every single ransom note in this case, the $4 million demand, the note claiming she was dead, the note claiming to know the kidnapper's identity, every one of them came from someone with no actual connection to whatever happened to Nancy Guthrie. Which means for 5 months, this family has been receiving cruel, fabricated messages from strangers pretending to know their mother's fate. And somewhere underneath all of that noise, whoever actually took her, if that's what happened, has never once been heard from. I want to take you somewhere the national coverage mostly skipped past, the actual street where this happened. The Catalina foothills is the kind of neighborhood people move to specifically to get away from things like this. Long driveways, towering saguaro cacti shielding houses from the road, neighbors who wave and say good morning and otherwise leave each other alone. One resident, George Fantry, who's lived there almost a decade, put it simply, it's the kind of place where you feel like you could leave your doors unlocked. Nobody there feels that way anymore. How could this happen in your neighborhood? Fantry asked in the days right after. I know most people would say this would be a very safe and quiet neighborhood. That's a bit scary that could happen around the corner from where you live. Weeks later, that fear had settled into something quieter and more permanent. Two women in the area, both close to Nancy's age, told CNN they now move through their own days with a kind of apprehension they never used to carry. Because we're her age, we feel like it could be us, one of them said. A restaurant owner 10 minutes from the house said she no longer goes outside at night alone. If it happens to her, she said, it can happen to anyone. But the fear from the disappearance itself turned out to be only half of what this neighborhood would have to survive. Because once the story went national, it didn't just bring investigators. It brought an entirely different kind of visitor, one that would end up staying for months. As national news crews packed up and moved on to the next story, a smaller, stranger group didn't. A handful of true crime content creators set up permanent camp near Nancy Guthrie's house. Cameras, chairs, live streams, treating her street like a stage. One resident described what months of this actually looked like from the inside, creators publishing neighbors' names, addresses, and license plates to tens of thousands of viewers, accusing ordinary people, with zero evidence, of being involved in Nancy's disappearance live on camera to an audience that couldn't tell speculation from fact. One elderly neighbor in particular became a recurring target. Creators insinuated on camera that she had something to do with the case. One of them even posted songs mocking her. It escalated to something almost absurd, if it weren't so genuinely cruel. In a June livestream, one creator got into a screaming argument with that same elderly woman, accusing her of scattering rocks and feces along the property line. Days later, Sheriff Nanos was shown video of that same man urinating in a tent in the street in front of a residential home. That was the moment the department finally cracked down. On June 8th, deputies arrested 3 separate content creators. The man from the tent video was charged with obstruction and public nuisance. I'll be honest with you about why I'm including this part of the story because I think it matters and because it's a little uncomfortable for me to sit with as someone making a true crime video myself. What happened to that neighborhood, the accusations, the harassment, an elderly woman being turned into a suspect on camera with nothing to back it up, that's not journalism. And it's not justice for Nancy Guthrie either. It's the worst version of what this genre can become when the actual story runs out and people fill the silence with speculation for clicks. I don't think covering a case like this means camping outside someone's house. I think it means telling you what's actually known, being honest about what isn't, and getting out of the way of people who are still living through it. That's the line I try to hold, and it's one I think got crossed badly here. I want to be honest with you about where this case actually stands right now because I think it's important not to pretend there's more clarity here than there is. 5 months in, a masked figure on a doorbell camera, blood confirmed to be Nancy's, a family formally cleared, 2 false physical leads, gloves and bones, that consumed real investigative time, 3 fake ransom notes that consumed even more, over $1 million in reward money, national television coverage, the full resources of the FBI. And still no suspect, no motive, no answer. I keep thinking about that quote from Sheriff Nanos back in May, insisting they were being careful rather than slow. And I keep thinking about what it must feel like as a family to hear we're being careful for the 5th consecutive month, while strangers on the internet send you fake proof that your mother is dead. I don't think this is a story about incompetence exactly. DNA testing does take time. Digital forensics are genuinely complicated. But I do think this is a story about how much a family can be asked to endure while a system tells them, over and over, to just wait a little longer. Savannah Guthrie has continued anchoring today throughout nearly all of this. She returned to the desk in April after a brief absence. She marked Mother's Day with a tribute to Nancy, nearly 100 days into her disappearance. She's done all of this in front of an audience of millions, most of whom have no idea what it's actually like to sit at a news desk delivering other people's tragedies while living inside one of your own. I don't know how this case ends. I don't think anyone currently does. Not the sheriff, not the FBI, not the family. What I do know is that somewhere in Tucson, Arizona, there is a house where an 84-year-old woman used to live, where blood was found on the porch 5 months ago, and where the person responsible has never been identified. If there's an update to this case, an arrest, a real lead, anything, I'll be back to cover it. Cases like this don't end when the news cycle moves on. They end when someone finally gets an answer. Subscribe to Criminal Files and hit the bell, because the next case is already coming and you do not want to miss it.